Hello everyone and welcome back to our TKT video lessons. In today's lesson, we are going to study Unit 21, which focuses on planning an individual lesson or a sequence of lessons from Module 2, Part 1 of the TKT coursebook. In this lesson, we will discuss the key things the teacher needs to consider when planning either a single lesson or a sequence of lessons. So, let's get started. When teachers plan a lesson, they don't just walk into the classroom and start teaching. Every lesson has a clear purpose and a structure. So, let's look at the four main things every individual lesson should include. First, every lesson needs aim. An aim is simply what you want your learner to achieve by the end of the lesson. Once you know your aim, you need to decide how you are going to achieve it. This means choosing suitable activities, materials, and teaching procedures. Each activity should help students move one step closer to achieving the lesson aim. Next, you should consider the shape of a lesson. This refers to the overall organization and sequence of activity. Finally, teachers choose techniques that are appropriate for their learners. As we all know, different learners have different needs. The key point is that teaching technique should match learner age, language level, their interests, and learning goals. For example, if we are introducing a new grammatical structure, we might choose a PPP approach or a TBL approach. In PPP approach, first, the teacher presents the new language using a situation, gets learner to practice it in exercises or other controlled practice activities, and then asks learners to use or produce the same language in a communicative and less controlled way. On the other hand, in TBL approach, the teacher asks learners to do a task which has an achievable result. The task the teacher gives is the type of task people might do in real life and which involve communicating with other learners. After the task, the teacher focuses on useful language or grammar that appear during the discussion. However, in TBL approach, the main focus for learner is on the task itself. When teaching receptive skill, we usually plan tasks or activity for learners to do before, while, and after reading or listening. When teaching productive skill, on the other hand, we normally explain the context and introduce new language and provide feedback after the speaking or writing activities. As you all know, good lesson planning is about connecting the lesson aims, the teaching procedures, and the learner's background. The lesson aim is what we want our learner to achieve. For example, if the aim is to help students use the present continuous, then all the activities should help them practice that language. The procedures are the steps we use to achieve the aim, such as presenting the language, giving controlled practice, and ending with speaking activities. Before planning an individual lesson, we should consider three things. First, the available materials. For example, do we have a course book, a whiteboard, or a laptop? Second, the length of the lesson. Third, information about the learners. For example, are they beginners or intermediate? Their age, level, and interest will also affect our lesson plan. After considering these factors, we choose the most suitable procedures. However, the most important thing is to make sure that the materials, tasks, and activities we choose are the ones that will help learners to achieve the aim of the lessons. A sequence of lessons is a number of related lessons that are connected. Instead of teaching everything in one lesson, we spread the learning over several lessons. This helps learners develop their language knowledge and language skills step by step over a period of time. When planning a sequence, all the lessons should have a clear connection. They may focus on one language area, such as grammar, or they may develop different skills around the same topic. Look at the three examples on this slide. The first example is a structural sequence. Here, the lessons are organized around grammar. For example, learners first revise the past simple, then revise the present perfect, and finally compare the two tenses. Each lesson builds on the previous one. The second one is an integrated skill sequence. Here, the lesson combines different language skills. Learners first learn vocabulary for describing places, then practice reading by choosing a holiday, and finally use what they have learned to write a letter to a friend about a holiday experience. In this sequence, vocabulary, reading, and writing all support each other. The third one is a project work sequence. In this type of sequence, learners complete a project over several lessons. For example, they first read and listen to the information about free time activities, then carry out a class survey, and finally prepare and present a poster showing the survey results. This gives learners a meaningful purpose for using English. So, the key idea is that a sequence of lessons is carefully planned so that each lesson prepares learner for the next one. The learning is connected, progressive, and helps learner achieve a larger goal. Now, let's look at some key questions to ask yourself when planning an individual lesson. These questions help you create a lesson that is clear, well organized, and focused on your learner needs. Let's look at each one. First, ask yourself, what is my overall aim? For example, if you are teaching the past simple, your aim might be to help learners talk about what they did last weekend. Next, think about whether the topic is interesting and motivating. Learners are more engaged when the topic is relevant to them. For instance, teenagers may enjoy a lesson about social media, while business professionals may prefer workplace situations. Then, ask, what are the learning outcomes? These are the specific things learners should be able to do by the end of the lesson, such as asking and answering questions about daily routines. Another important question is whether the activities and materials are suitable for your learner level. Think about whether the tasks are too easy or too difficult. For example, a long newspaper article may not be suitable for elementary learners, but a short dialogue could be. Also consider the time available. Make sure your lesson fits the available time. For example, if you have a 60-minute lesson, avoid planning activity that takes 80 minutes. It's also helpful to prepare one short backup activity in case you finish early. Ask yourself whether each stage helps achieve the lesson A. Every activity should have a purpose. For example, if a game doesn't help learner practice the target language, you may decide to remove it. If an activity doesn't support the aim of your lessons, you may decide to remove it. It is also important that the lesson develop logically. A good lesson follows a clear sequence. For example, learners might first learn new vocabulary, then practice it in pair, and finally use it in a role-play activity. Finally, think about how you will start and end the lesson. As you know, a strong beginning gains learner attention, and a good ending reviews what they have learned. Also think about whether you have any personal aims, such as improving your instructions or giving feedback effectively. By asking yourself these questions before every lesson, you will create lesson plans that are organized, purposeful, and effective. Here are two set of notes from the procedure section of lesson plans. One for a lesson introducing and practicing new language, and the other for a skill-based lesson. At first glance, they look quite similar. Both start with a warm-up, and both include a reading text, speaking, and homework, but the main aim is different. In lesson 1, the aim is to introduce and practice new language. In this example, students are learning comparative adjectives. So, after reading the text, students noted the language, work out the grammar rules, and then practice the structures in control activities. The lesson moves from language presentation to control practice, and finally to freer production. Look at lesson 2. This is a skill-based lesson, and the aim is different. Here, the goal is developing reading skill, not teaching a grammar point. Students first prepare for the text, then complete a gist reading task to understand the main idea. After that, they do detailed reading tasks, such as matching jumbo paragraph summary to the text and answering true-false questions. Finally, they discuss the topic and write a reply to the letter. Notice that the focus is on a reading sub-skill, such as reading for gist, reading for detail, and understanding text organization, rather than learning a particular grammar structure. So, from these two example lessons, we can say that language lesson focus on language forms and control practice. before students use the language more freely. Skills-based lessons, on the other hand, focus on developing receptive or protective skills by practicing specific sub-skills. Language may still appear, but it supports the skill rather than being the main focus. This is an example of a language-focused lesson. Looking at its content, each unit mainly teaches language systems such as grammar, vocabulary, pronunciations, and functional language. In this lesson, students learn new language and then practice using it accurately before moving on to more communicative activities. So this is an example of a skill-based lesson. When looking at the contents, we can see that it focuses on developing student reading, writing, and study skill. The main aim is not to teach new grammar, but to help learners improve their ability to understand text, write effectively, and use academic learning strategies. So, the main difference is that a language-focused lesson aims to teach language systems such as grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. A skill-based lesson, on the other hand, aims to develop learner reading, writing, listening, or speaking skills. Of course, both lesson types may include grammar and vocabulary, but the main lesson aim is different. Now, let's look at planning a sequence of lessons. Rather than planning one lesson at a time, teachers use a scheme of work to organize a series of lessons over a term or unit. A scheme of work helps us make sure we cover the syllabus or coursebook within the available time. It also helps us think about our learning aims, choose the material we might need, and include enough variety by using different activities, skills, and teaching methods across lessons to keep lesson engaging. In other words, a scheme of work is a long-term plan that helps teachers organize several lessons, not just one lesson. It ensures that students learn the whole syllabus or complete all the units in a coursebook within the available time. For example, if we are teaching the topic of food, we might introduce vocabulary in the first lesson, practice listening and speaking in the second, and finish with a writing task in the third. Teacher and learner need clear aims that go beyond a single lesson and need to see how each lesson connects to the previous and next lesson, making learning more meaningful. Look at the three examples of schemes of work. Scheme A is very simple because it only lists broad areas such as grammar, vocabulary, listening, speaking, reading, writing, and test. Although it is easy to read, it does not tell us what grammar, vocabulary, or skill students will actually learn. It gives very little guidance to the teachers. Scheme C is the opposite. It gives a lot of detail. It includes class discussions, grammar points, reading tasks, writing tasks, peer corrections, games, pronunciation practice, and group work. This provides clear guidance, but it is very detailed and therefore less flexible. If students learn more slowly or more quickly than expected, it may be difficult to change the plan. Scheme B is generally considered the best example out of three because it gives enough detail to guide the teacher without becoming too restrictive. For each week, it includes language focus, vocabulary topic, skill practice, revision, speaking activities, writing activities. It also shows how one week's work builds on the previous week. For example, week 3 focuses on grammar revisions and vocabulary. Week 4 checks vocabulary and develop reading and speaking. Week 5 revises previous work before introducing new grammar and writing. Week 6 finishes with speaking activities and feedback. This creates a logical learning progression. For these reasons, we can say that Scheme B is the most balanced and practical scheme of work among them. When planning a single lesson and a sequence of lessons, it is important to include variety. Variety keeps learners interested, motivated, and actively involved in learning. If every lesson follows the same pattern, students may become bored and less engaged. We can introduce variety in several ways. First, we can vary the pace. Some activity can be quick and energetic, such as a vocabulary game, while others can be slower and more reflective, like writing a paragraph. We can also change the interaction pattern. Sometimes students work individually, sometimes in pairs or groups, and sometimes as a whole class. This gives learners different opportunity to practice. Another way is to vary the skill we focus on. For example, one activity may develop receptive skills such as reading or listening, while others develop productive skills such as speaking or writing. We should also vary the level of difficulty. A simple matching activity can be followed by a more challenging discussion or problem-solving task. Variety can also come from the changing of the content. Instead of teaching the same type of the language all the time, we can move from grammar to vocabulary or from topics like travel to technology. Finally, think about the mood of the lessons. Some activities are serious and require concentration, while others are fun and relaxed. It's also useful to balance tiring activities such as role play or games with settling activity such as reading quietly or completing a worksheet. By varying these different aspects, we can create lessons that are more engaging, balanced, and effective for different learners. Now is your turn to practice. Look at the scheme of work and answer the questions. Think carefully about how effective the plan is and whether you would design it in the same way. Pause the video here, and when you are ready, continue to compare your idea with the suggested answer provided in the video descriptions. If you found this video lesson helpful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss future TKT lessons. Thank you very much for watching this video lesson, and I will see you in the next lesson. Happy teaching and happy learning.